Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Secure Your Next Great Discovery. I am Jennifer Woods of LabRoots, and I'll be your moderator for today's event. Today's educational web seminar is presented by LabRoots and brought to you by Eppendorf. We encourage you to participate today by submitting any questions you may have during the presentation. To do so, simply type them into the Ask a Question box and click Send. We'll answer as many questions as we have time for at the end of the presentation. You may also submit any technical issues here as well if you have trouble seeing or hearing the presentation. I'd like to now welcome our speakers, Paulina Kocjan and Kate Meola from the Eppendorf team, and Zareh Zurabyan, who also goes by Z, Director of eLab Next. Speakers, you may now begin your presentation.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. So, hi everyone. Thank you again for being here today. My name is Paulina, and in this webinar, we're going to be talking about the importance of your sample and what a comprehensive sample management solution looks like and how it can actually benefit you and your lab. So let's just take a look at the agenda and kind of what we're going to step through. So really first, we want to talk about, your samples. What types of samples do you work with in the lab? Why are they so valuable? So, every day in and out of the lab, you're working with these samples, you're storing them, you're processing them. What samples are these and kind of, what makes them so important? Then we really want to talk about sample management. So we want to talk about, what types of issues do you typically run into, when you don't have a sample management system in your lab, and how can you actually resolve them? And then last but not least, we want to talk about kind of the Eppendorf solution. So Sample 360, which is going to be really the end-to-end solution for how to transform your sample management. So let's talk about your samples in the lab. So there are multiple types of samples you typically work with, from DNA, RNA, to cells, bacteria, and more. So what types of samples are we going to focus on today? We want to talk about the samples you store in your -80 ULT freezer, your DNA, RNA, antibodies, tissues, specimens, etc. So anything that you would have for long-term storage in your freezer. So what makes your samples so valuable? You can spend a lot of time preparing your samples before storing, such as bacterial strains of interest that are needed for further downstream processes. So that's kind of already the initial thing that makes them already so valuable. The next thing is the reagents and consumables. They could typically be very costly in the lab for prepping and for storing your samples. Reaction miniaturization is becoming more prevalent in genomics applications to scale down reaction volumes in order to achieve cost savings. Additionally, in many experiments, technical replicates are needed to address the reproducibility of the assay or method. Your data is dependent on your sample security. If your samples cannot be clearly identified at any point throughout your research, then the data you generate will not be reliable. Since you would not know if you're using the correct sample throughout your workflow, then your results could not be trusted. And finally, many of your samples stored at -80C are the original and cannot be replaced. So that's kind of one of the biggest top things, is that in many labs, you might have an official sample like your FFPE sample or whatever it is that you're storing in your -80, and it cannot be replaced. So once you lose it or you can't correctly identify it, then it is gone. So in the end, your samples are basically priceless. So your samples are everything. So by improving how you manage them, you are not only ensuring their security, but also the reliability of your results. Your next discovery could be key in improving human health, sustaining and restoring our environment, protecting endangered species, or understanding the diversity and significance of microbes, to just name a few. Now let's look at how the mismanagement of your samples could lead to difficulties that can inhibit you from moving forward in your research. You care about your research and validating your findings, which means your samples need to be a priority as well. So let's see kind of what happens when your samples are not a priority. This is the first example we're going to go through. So accurate sample tracking is key in most laboratories for the ability to identify a sample after collection, its location, volume, and steps it has taken in a process. Sample traceability can be lost due to mismanagement of samples, which can lead to then wasted time and effort preparing these samples. In the end, this can also result in delays that mean that you could either have lost your sample or, you basically cannot then meet your project deadlines. So this is just showing the path of the mismanagement of your samples when you don't put your samples as priority. So sample traceability is super important because it's not just about, tracking your samples, but in the end, if you lose your samples and cannot properly track them, they could lead to larger project delays. Another example is the improper storage of your samples, which could cause degradation, making it difficult to complete experiments. So now you'll probably have to repeat your experiments if the sample can still be obtained. When you store your samples in the freezer overnight to go home or work on data analysis at your desk, others can access the freezer during this time. Someone else might leave the freezer door open too long or move your sample to a different location while looking for theirs. Your samples are very important and should be managed properly to ensure their safety. And again, we go through that same path of, if your sample's degraded, again, you have unreliable data and you might need to repeat your experiments, if you even can, if you're able to. Kate will now go further into the types of issues you can run into without proper sample management.
Okay, thanks, Paulina. So we've seen why your samples are so valuable and why you should make how you manage them a priority. Now let's take a look at some of the challenges you face when managing your samples. And if you're struggling with sample management, I'm sure some of these will look very familiar to you. So first up, we have sample identification issues. So when was the last time you opened the freezer and found a sample that was labeled like this one on the left? Can you read what that says? If so, your eyes are definitely better than mine. Even if you're the one who wrote it, you may not be able to remember what it says months later, which doesn't help much when you're trying to find that one specific sample that is crucial to your research. Writing on tubes can also wear off during storage or processing, either with regular wear or due to certain chemicals. Samples can also be mislabeled with incorrect identification. Printed labels, like the one on the right, are certainly an improvement over handwritten labels, but these can also fall off during storage or processing, and they still require you to read each individual sample to find the one you need. If a sample can't be identified, it also can't be traced. Remember that, as Paulina said earlier, inability to identify your samples correctly may lead to unreliable data. Then there's sample storage. So many people don't realize that how you store your samples is just as important as how you handle them. A disorganized freezer like this one not only wastes your time as you search for the right sample, but it also wastes valuable space in your freezer. If you don't know what's in there, how do you know if you really need it? You may think that you're running out of space when in fact 30% or even more of what you're storing in your freezer might be completely unnecessary. So wasting time looking for samples could also lead to inaccurate data. How? Well, besides not being able to find the correct sample in this entire mess here, the longer the freezer door remains open, the greater the temperature fluctuation in the chamber. Over time, continuous temperature fluctuations from long door openings can lead to degradation and impact the integrity of your samples, potentially affecting your results. Leaving the door open for too long or using a freezer without proper insulation can also cause ice buildup, as the warm, moist air from the outside environment combines with the ultra-low temperatures inside the freezer, creating the dreaded frost. Everyone knows about this one. This buildup is not only incredibly annoying, but it can cause additional problems by preventing a tight seal of the freezer door, which, as you might guess, leads to even more frost. If you're sharing the freezer in the lab with others, you also can't control who has access, nor can you monitor when and for how long they are leaving the freezer door open. There's also the unexpected human element to consider. Not only can people keep the door open too long or fail to close the door properly, but I heard a story recently in which the contents of the freezer were lost because the freezer was accidentally switched off by a maintenance worker who happened to be working near the freezer. So these things do happen. The lab is a busy place, and accidents like this can occur. Another big issue with sample storage is energy consumption. Older ULT freezers are inefficient and can consume huge amounts of energy, affecting both your budget and the planet. Older model ULTs can actually use as much energy in a day as an entire household. And the classic cooling liquids they use, including chlorofluorocarbons and hydrofluorocarbons, have been proven to be potent greenhouse gases. So moving on, what about documentation? If you don't properly document the location of your samples or the data you have collected related to the sample, details may be lost and your project data could be inaccurate or incomplete. You could also be non-compliant with regulations. All steps of your experimental methods, including sample data, need to be properly documented. When that data is scattered in different places, such as multiple paper lab notebooks or Excel files, it's more difficult to track and more easily compromised. And then finally, we have sample management inefficiencies. So how many times have you had this same thought? If you've gone into the lab on the weekend just to check on your freezer, then you know what I'm talking about. When you leave the lab for the day or for the weekend, you don't know what is happening while you're away. If something goes wrong, an alarm may sound, but that doesn't help anyone if there's no one there to hear it and take corrective action. Alarms alone don't ensure safety. Additionally, lab devices need regular maintenance. But with so much activity going on in the lab, it's easy to forget to change the filter or to check the backup battery. I will tell you that a power outage is a terrible time to find out that your backup battery is not working. Again, these things do happen. So, how do we solve these issues? Well, I'm happy to tell you that no matter what the current state of your sample management, there are steps you can take to get yourself and your lab back on track. For example, switching to permanently barcoded sample vials and tubes ensures proper identification every time. These labels won't rub off or fall off, and they can easily be scanned and uploaded into a data management system that can securely store all of your sample data in one centralized location. You can also use this software to manage your inventory and visually locate your sample before you ever open the sample door, the freezer door rather. To make sure your samples are protected while they're being stored, use a high-quality freezer that includes heavy-duty insulation, a robust compressor, doors with advanced gaskets that prevent frost buildup, and additional safety features like electronic locks and unique user access. Equip your freezer with a CO2 or liquid nitrogen backup system to keep samples protected in case of failure. To ensure energy efficiency and sustainability, look for freezers that are ENERGY STAR rated, ACT certified, and utilize natural, eco-friendly coolants. Organize your freezer with racks and storage boxes. These help maximize the available space and keep samples easily accessible. Use a digital platform that allows you to remotely monitor your storage devices when you are away from the lab and to set regular maintenance reminders. Remote monitoring ensures that you're notified of alarms immediately so that proper action can be taken to protect your samples. You could even take it a step further by digitizing your lab with smart solutions that enable connectivity throughout the lab. Remember, proper sample management leads to reliable data and confidence in your results, which could lead to your next great discovery. So let's put it all together. If you're asking yourself, what would a comprehensive sample management system look like in my lab? Well, I'm glad you asked. Let's have a look now at Sample 360, Eppendorf's solution for end-to-end ultra-low temperature sample management. The integrated family of products and services provides a 360-degree view and confidence at every step. Each element of the solution works seamlessly together to ensure that your data is secure and your results are reliable. Knowing that your samples are protected means more time for your research. Eppendorf Sample 360 includes products to secure, store, track, and monitor your samples. Use the entire family of products together for a complete sample management solution, or just use the individual components of Sample 360 as needed to round out your current sample management system. The Sample 360 solution includes barcoded storage files, ultra-low temperature freezers, software for managing and tracking your sample inventory, and a digital platform for lab monitoring. Paulina will now start to walk us through products that are part of this solution. Paulina?
Awesome. Thank you, Kate. So the first part of this solution, of the Sample 360 solution, as Kate mentioned, is the barcoded vials. So the Eppendorf SafeCode system ensures the security of your samples. These barcoded cryostorage vials utilize a 3-level coding for reliable identification of your samples throughout your workflow. So first, a 2D data matrix with an ECC200, meaning that they could be damaged up to 30% and still read. A 1D classic barcode, and a readable numeric ID. Additional documentation is also available on the Eppendorf website with information for each vial, such as volume, lot number, and certificates of quality. So all that information that you're looking for could be found on that Eppendorf data port, and all that information is going to be in one place, so you know that your samples are secure. So SafeCode, these barcoded vessels are available in multiple formats. So they come from 0.5 to 4 mils. And so they're basically able to work with a wide variety of applications. So whether you're storing things in 0.5 or 4 mils or whatever you need during your processing, they're available in many different types of formats. Additionally, they come pre-capped and pre-racked for easy handling. So you don't have to worry about organizing them in a rack. Additionally, the twist lock bottom of the tubes also prevents the vials from rotating within the rack when being opened for easy and even automated capping and uncapping. Kate will now talk about the storage of these samples.
Yeah, thanks, Paulina. Okay, so let's keep going. A high-quality freezer is crucial for ensuring the safety of your samples. With 26.1 cubic feet of storage space, the CryoCube F740HI features vacuum insulation paneling combined with polyurethane foam insulation all around the freezer, including in the door, to keep warm air out and cold air in. Flat, flexible gaskets, instead of the typical accordion-style gaskets, prevent ice buildup and are also easy to clean. Together, they ensure short recovery times after door opening and long warm-up time in case of a power failure. A locking switch plate prevents that accidental shutoff that we were talking about earlier. Both the power switch and the backup battery switch are protected by this plate. Whether you require a 3-shelf or a 5-shelf configuration, unique stainless steel or aluminum racks are available to maximize the space. ENERGY STAR and ACT certification attests to the CryoCube's high energy efficiency and low environmental impact. This freezer uses only natural hydrocarbon refrigerants, a plus for the environment. The CryoCube F740HI also features a high-efficiency 2-stage cascade cooling system and unique vented shelves for optimized uniformity. Both of these also contribute to quick recovery times that I mentioned earlier, as well as a quick initial pull-down time from ambient temperature to minus 80 degrees in just over 4 hours. The CryoCube F740HI complements its high-quality, heavy-duty components with an advanced touchscreen interface that provides an even greater sample protection. An integrated electronic door lock makes protecting your samples from unwanted visitors easier than ever, while unique user access allows you to limit who is allowed to make certain changes. So, for example, you may wish to allow certain people in the lab to have access to unlock the door and get to their samples, but you might not want them to have the ability to change any of the freezer settings, such as the set temperature or alarm settings. At the same time, the lab manager may require full access to all settings and data. So each of these users would have a different passcode to grant them the appropriate level of access. All temperature and event logging is tracked directly on board the freezer 24/7, meaning that every opening of the door, including the user who opened it and how long it was open, is tracked along with every alarm and event notification. Security features like these really provide an extra level of protection for your samples and give you the evidence to prove that your samples have not been compromised, ensuring confidence in your research. I'll now pass it over to Z to tell us about the next product in the Sample 360 solution. Z?
Thank you, Kate. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. I'm Z, I go by Z, and I will be talking about eLab Inventory, which is a product of eLab Next, which is a division of Eppendorf. And on this screen here, just a visual cue here for you guys to see before I move on to the next slide. This is a digital representation of what your physical lab can look like. So whether you're storing your samples in freezers in minus 80s, minus 20s, maybe it is a storage room or an acid and base cabinet, whatever your sample type is, this system allows you to customize them, create them, and then give them very specific locations within your actual lab, and allowing you to access it, find it, and do series of manipulations to these samples with a direct audit trail to the things that you're doing. So with that in mind, with this visual in mind, I'll talk about some of the highlights of eLab Inventory. So first of all, having a digital platform is not enough because technically speaking, Google Drive is a digital platform as well. User interface being very intuitive and allowing you to do easy handling of your samples is crucial, especially if we're talking about high volumes. To give you an example, I'm currently working with a lab that is doing COVID-19 research, and they're managing about 10,000 samples a day. When you're speaking of such volumes, user interface is extremely important. Secondly, import and export capabilities for a software are very important for several reasons. Whether you are an academic lab or a healthcare lab that has 50 years of research and legacy samples that you've collected throughout the years, or a startup lab that is just starting, you might already have some Excels or other systems that you might have used that have a lot of crucial information. And having a system that is able to import this information in from other systems, maybe from some robots, maybe creating some automation in the process. These are things that you can do in eLab Inventory, which allows you to adapt to your current environment and to any other systems that you might be using. Additionally, audit trail is very important with these samples. You know, many of you are working with high-profile samples, whether you consider them high-profile because of their cost, like some expensive antibodies, or it harbors a lot of intellectual property within it. You'd like to know exactly what's being done to that sample, how it's being moved around, what's being updated within it. And this is, of course, part of GLP compliance, which falls under the 21 CFR Part 11, which allows you to not only keep track of your sample changes, but also everything else in your lab that is uploaded in eLab Next, eLab Inventory. For example, which instruments are being used, who is accessing, what are the reservations that were made on a particular freezer, all the way to the individual samples and supplies that are being managed. And really the end result of all of this, along with all of the problems that my colleagues have brought up, it really comes down to one common denominator, which is you're doing less searching in the lab, you're doing less of these things that used to be manual, and that opens up your time to do a lot of more actual research that you've been hired to do. And we've seen labs really scale up in their efficiency since the implementation of eLab Inventory and many of these other Eppendorf products. So I will be, towards the end, I'll be available for any questions. And without further ado, I'll pass it on back to the team with the rest. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Z. So inventory management of your stored samples is important, but there's one final component to our Sample 360 solution. VisioNize Lab Suite is a cloud-based platform with integrated services that provides you, the scientists, researchers, and lab managers, the ability to remotely monitor your devices and equipment, receive alarm notifications, and manage your assets, as well as simplify their device maintenance. And as you can see with this image, that we connect to multiple different devices. So your incubators, your thermocyclers, your freezers, many different types of devices in your lab. By connecting your devices with VisioNize Lab Suite, such as your freezer, you can remotely monitor its activity from anywhere, be notified of alarms, and address issues quickly. Relevant documents, such as SOPs, can also be accessed using this platform. By implementing VisioNize in your lab, you know your samples are safe and you can have peace of mind. VisioNize Lab Suite can help you in achieving your vision by improving productivity, facilitating collaboration, and making data easily accessible. It can be customized to support you in your lab with your ever-changing needs. Using a subscription-based model, you can choose which devices to connect and add-on services you require for your lab. Such services include maintenance management, by being able to plan for upcoming tasks, such as when devices are due for service or pipettes for calibration. Detailed audit logs can also be accessed that include device performance data, such as parameters and user interventions, such as set point changes, which can be beneficial for meeting compliance needs. And for some selected devices, you can also get remote updates, including device improvements and new features, which makes everything really easy and simple. So, what is the outcome? What do you get by implementing a sample management solution such as Sample 360 in your lab? So first, your samples are secure. They are barcoded for reliable identification, stored in high-quality organized freezers, and can be tracked with the software used to centralize sample data from all storage locations. And last but not least, they're secure in your freezer that is monitored for any alarm or issues. With secure samples, your data is reliable and trustworthy, which means you can achieve your goals and complete your research. Your lab processes are also more efficient. The benefit of secure samples is less time searching for lost samples or trying to identify them, or dealing with storage device issues. With a more streamlined process, productivity is increased, allowing you to focus on your work. You have full peace of mind. You can now worry about one less thing with Sample 360. So what in the end can you do? You can focus on your research and make your next great discovery. So thank you so much for everyone for joining us. Be sure to take a survey that you would have to just go into the lobby and you should see it on your left-hand side for a chance to win an Eppendorf backpack. So we will be choosing 5 winners. So definitely be sure to do that. Also explore our virtual lab to learn more about our sample management solution, and feel free to talk to us at the Eppendorf booth as well. All right, so any questions? So I think we had a few in the chat, so I think now we'll go through some of those.
Thank you, Paulina, Kate, and Z for your informative presentations. We will now start the live Q&A portion of the webinar. If you have a question you would like to ask, please do so now. Just click on the Ask a Question box located on the far left of your screen. We'll answer as many questions as we have time for. Okay, let's get started. Our first question is, which coolant liquid could we use for CryoCube F740 high ULT freezer?
Thanks, Jennifer. Yeah, I can take that one. Sure. So the CryoCube F740HI utilizes 2 cooling liquids. They are R290 and R170, otherwise known as propane and ethane. These are hydrocarbon refrigerants, so they are very friendly to the environment. They're much better than some of the older hydrofluorocarbon refrigerants that are potent greenhouse gases. And then I think your question was just what coolants do we use in the CryoCube F740? But if your question was related to backup systems, that could also be, you could use a CO2 backup or a liquid nitrogen backup. Hope that answers your question.
Thank you. And our next question here is, what should the first step for the automation of the lab? What should be the first step, for the automation of a lab?
Yeah, so I can definitely take that one. So, a lot of what we have talked about today is, sample management, which of course is, I would say, one of the big important steps of automating anything. So, documenting your process, understanding what your workflow is, and then understanding, what parts of your workflow that you actually want to automate. So, Eppendorf has a lot of different automation solutions from, smaller workstations to larger. So I think, going through your workflow and seeing kind of where would I need that automation help. So, I think automation is not just for efficiency and productivity, but also, to deal with difficult liquids and, for higher accuracy and precision. So I would definitely think that it makes sense to kind of walk through your workflow and start kind of first understanding how to track your sample and, how to take your sample through the workflow, and then what makes sense to automate.
All right. Thanks again for that amazing answer. And our next question, if I need a sample management solution, do I need to purchase all products included in the Sample 360?
Yeah, sure. So I guess I could take this one as well. So no, so kind of like Kate went through, this is the Sample 360 solution that, we're definitely talking about that we would feel is a good end-to-end solution. But for example, if you think that the freezer and VisioNize or whatever would work for your lab the best, and maybe you already have other solutions in place, then that's totally fine.
Right. Thank you, Paulina. And we've got another question here. Can the same principles or techniques be used to store SARS-CoV-2 vaccines?
Hi. Yeah, so absolutely. The workflow that we're presenting here today can really be used for absolutely any type of sample or really anything you're storing in your ULT freezer. Z, was there anything you wanted to add specifically about how eLab works with vaccines?
Yeah, sure. So the good thing about eLab inventory is that it's highly flexible and configurable. So whether you are working with vaccines, with cell lines, tissue, or live animals, you get to create them within eLab and then define the fields that you want to keep track of. So with that in mind, the sky is the limit. It's really become the digital representation of your physical lab becomes your playground and allows you to create the environment online. And it actually ends up having an effect on your physical lab as well, because now you are thinking of standardizing certain things. It affects the behavior in the lab, how you do things, how often. So along with all of these other features that my colleagues have talked about with regards to automation, that's another thing that I'd mention is that sometimes it becomes difficult when you think about automation of this big thing, because you keep on adding more and more things that you want to automate, and the project becomes bigger and bigger. Sometimes looking at the easiest things to automate can be that very first step for you to build on. So there's just another note that I wanted to add. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you, Kate and Z. I've got another question, and I think, Z, this might be more for you. What kind of data is stored for each sample in eLab inventory?
Yeah, that's a great question. So to give you an example of COVID, since we're talking about that, let's say you are a company or a hospital that is taking samples from patients or people that are giving their tests. You might want to keep track of the sex of the patient, where they're from, do they have any pre-existing conditions, things like that. But if you're working in a cancer research lab and you are working with tumor tissues, the type of things that you're keeping track of is completely different. And the system is able to adapt to that. So again, it really does not matter what kind of lab you are, what kind of research you're doing. Everything is template driven. So for every sample type that you work with, you're able to create that sample type from scratch. And then as you do, those fields become searchable in the future. So you develop arsenal of tools and features that serve you in the future for your digital sustainability. There's one thing that we always talk about, which is digital health. So it's not only important to digitize your lab for better sample management, it's important to digitize it in a way that is healthy and it has longevity for long term. And these are things that you can do in eLab inventory.
All right, thank you, Z. Our next question is, how do you purchase VisioNize to connect all your devices?
All right, thank you, Jennifer. So I can take this one. So with VisioNize, you could basically, choose what devices you want to connect, and then it's basically a subscription-based model. So, you can basically, like you would as like Netflix or Amazon or anything like that, kind of works the same way. So it would just be kind of like a monthly type of charge. And yeah, so you just choose what devices and what services that you want to add on.
Wow, that's really cool. Sorry, normally I wouldn't comment, but I think that's awesome. All right, so our next question, is the CryoCube Energy Star rated?
Yes, it is. Yeah, actually, the CryoCube F740HI is Energy Star rated, and it is actually also ACT certified. And I want to actually take this question as a chance to tell you a little bit about ACT in case you're not familiar with it. ACT is a label provided by My Green Lab that really looks at the sustainability of a product. So if you're interested in environmental concerns, it's going beyond just the energy efficiency part, which is also a part of the ACT label. It takes into account Energy Star data. But in addition to that, it also scores you on a number of different things like how recyclable is your packaging, what's the end of life for the product, all sorts of different levels. If you go to act.mygreenlab.com, you can read more about the ACT label. It's up and coming. The CryoCube is actually the first ULT freezer to receive the ACT label, and we're very proud of that. So, but yes, Energy Star rated, absolutely, and you can certainly check that out on energystar.gov.
Wow, thank you. That sounds like it's a step above Energy Star even, so that's great. Next question coming in. Can you store the SafeCode cryo storage vials in liquid nitrogen?
So yeah, I'll take that one. So yes, you actually can. So I know we were focusing mainly on, the -80 ULT freezers in this webinar, but yes, you can as well store them in liquid nitrogen if you need to.
All right, perfect. Thank you. And we have time for one last question. Does VisioNize only work with freezers or other devices as well?
So I could take this one as well. And so mainly, again, as we were focusing on freezers, I did talk a little bit about that, but VisioNize also works with other devices. So, other freezers you may have in your lab, as well as, thermocyclers and incubators and pipettes actually as well. So there's many different devices that you can connect VisioNize to.
Well, thank you, Paulina, Kate, and Z. Do you have any final comments for our audience?
Yeah, so thank you. So I just want to say thank you again so much for joining and, taking the time to join this webinar. And also, if you're interested in more, the Sample 360 solution or, have questions, definitely visit our landing page, which is the eppendorf.com/sample360.
Well, thanks so much, everyone.
I'm sorry. And do you you guys have any other final comments before I wrap up?
Nope. Just thank you for joining.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I didn't want to cut anybody off. Thank you again, Paulina, Kate, and Z, for your time today. We would also like to thank LabRoots and our sponsor, Eppendorf, for underwriting today's educational webcast. Before we go, I'd like to thank the audience for joining us today and for their interesting questions. Questions we did not have time for today, and those submitted during the on-demand period will be addressed by the speakers via the contact information you provided at the time of registration. This webcast can be viewed on demand. LabRoots will alert you via email when it's available for replay. We encourage you to share that email with your colleagues who may have missed today's live event. Until next time, goodbye.